Welcome to the channel, everyone. America, bless its cotton socks, has a knack for making lasting impressions around the world. But 2025 seems to be a vintage year for international side-eye directed right at the good old US of A. From Moscow to Caracas, Beijing to Tehran, a chorus of Yankee Go Home is echoing across the globe. Over the next little while, we're diving headfirst into this tangled web of tension. So buckle up, kids. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Russia, land of borscht, ballet, and brooding strongmen riding bears shirtless. It's a country that's had a complicated relationship with the US, to say the least. Now, Russia's beef with America isn't exactly news. We're talking decades of mistrust, espionage, and enough nuclear warheads to turn the planet into a radioactive wasteland. First, you've got the whole US military intervention thing. From the Middle East to Eastern Europe, America's habit of poking its nose and its drones into everyone else's business hasn't exactly won it any popularity contests in Moscow. Then there's the issue of economic sanctions. Remember those? Turns out, slapping penalties on a country's economy doesn't exactly scream best friends forever. Russia isn't playing the victim anymore. They're flexing their muscles on the world stage, forging alliances, and generally making it clear that they're not going to be pushed around by Uncle Sam. The big question is, can these two alpha dogs learn to share the geopolitical yard without ending the world as we know it? Next up, we've got China, the economic powerhouse that's basically the world's factory, and increasingly its banker. Now, China and the US, they're like that ambitious co-worker who pretends to be your friend while secretly gunning for your promotion. One of the biggest bones of contention, Taiwan. See, China considers Taiwan to be a breakaway province, a wayward child that needs to be brought back into the fold. The US, on the other hand, has been playing the role of protective older sibling, much to China's annoyance. Then there's the trade war. Remember that whole tariffs thing a few years back? Yeah, turns out slapping taxes on each other's exports didn't exactly foster international brotherhood. But here's the thing about China. They play the long game. They're thinking decades, even centuries ahead, building influence, securing resources, and generally positioning themselves to be the dominant force in the 21st century. So while the US is busy trying to remember what soft power even means, China is out there building bridges, literally and figuratively. And that, my friends, should make even the most ardent capitalist a little nervous. Germany, land of beer, bratwurst, and surprisingly efficient bureaucracy. Not exactly the first place you'd expect to find anti-American sentiment brewing. For decades, Germany and the US were practically joined at the hip, politically speaking. NATO buddies, trading partners, united against the evils of communism. But lately, that special relationship has started to feel a little one-sided. Germany is tired of being lectured to about defense spending, while America throws its military might around like confetti at a parade. Tired of being caught in the crossfire of economic sanctions that hurt European businesses more than they do the intended targets. And frankly, a little tired of the America knows best attitude that seems to permeate US foreign policy. Germany isn't about to join the axis of evil or anything, but they are increasingly charting their own course, pursuing closer ties with Russia and China, and generally questioning whether America's interests are actually aligned with their own. If America isn't careful, it might just find itself on the outside looking in, wondering where it all went wrong. Chapter 4, Turkey, straddling the East-West divide. Let's talk Turkey, where East meets West and kebabs are king. A key NATO ally, Turkey bridges Europe and the Middle East, but lately that bridge looks shaky. Tensions with the US over Syria and Kurdish forces, cozying up to Russia, buying Chinese weapons, Turkey's balancing act. Chapter 5, Iran, a history of hostility. Iran, land of ancient history, beautiful carpets, and a government that seems hell-bent on giving American foreign policy wonks a collective aneurysm. The US and Iran have been at odds since, well, pretty much forever, but things really went south after the 1979 Islamic Revolution and the whole hostage crisis thing. Fast forward a few decades, throw in some nuclear ambitions, a few sternly worded UN resolutions, and a whole lot of mutual mistrust, and you've got yourself a recipe for geopolitical indigestion. The Trump administration's decision to rip up the Iran nuclear deal and slap sanctions back on like they were going out of style, yeah, that didn't help. Iran's response, well, they're not exactly backing down. They're enriching uranium, flexing their muscles in the Strait of Hormuz, and generally making it clear that they're not going to be bullied by the big bad US of A. Is this a sustainable situation? Probably not. Chapter 6. North Korea. The Hermit Kingdom rattles its sabers. North Korea, a land of stunning natural beauty, a deeply repressive regime, and a seemingly endless supply of missiles. It's the geopolitical equivalent of that weird kid in school who ate glue, had a disturbingly detailed knowledge of explosives, and threatened to blow up the cafeteria. North Korea and the US have been playing a bizarre game of nuclear chicken. The US wants North Korea to disarm. North Korea wants the US to acknowledge it as a nuclear power. It's a stalemate with high stakes. Diplomacy, sanctions, all options are on the table. In the meantime, we're all just along for the ride. Chapter 7. Venezuela, Revolution and Resistance. Venezuela, a country blessed with incredible natural beauty, vast oil reserves, and a government that seems determined to run the entire place into the ground. It's a story of economic mismanagement, political repression, and a whole lot of people just trying to survive. Now, the United States and Venezuela have a long and complicated history, but things really started to go south. No pun intended during the Chavez years. Hugo Chavez, the fiery socialist leader, was no fan of American imperialism, and he wasn't afraid to say so. He nationalized industries, cozied up to Cuba, and generally made life difficult for American companies operating in Venezuela. Then came Nicolas Maduro, Chavez's hand-picked successor, who somehow managed to make things even worse. The United States, for its part, has been trying to push Maduro out of power, slapping on sanctions, recognizing opposition leaders, and generally making it clear that they'd rather see anyone else in charge. But Maduro, despite presiding over a humanitarian disaster of epic proportions, has clung to power like a limpet to a rock. Syria, a country that was once a cradle of civilization, is now a tragic testament to the horrors of war. A brutal civil war, foreign intervention, and the rise of ISIS have turned what was once a vibrant nation into a shattered ruin. The United States, as it often does, waded into this quagmire with the best of intentions, aiming to combat ISIS and support moderate rebel groups. But as we've learned time and time again, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and the situation in Syria is about as hellish as it gets. The US intervention, while successful in degrading ISIS, has also been criticized for exacerbating the conflict, leading to civilian casualties and creating a power vacuum that Russia and Iran have been all too happy to fill. The Syrian government, backed by Russia, has been accused of horrific war crimes, including the use of chemical weapons against its own people. The US, caught between its stated goal of promoting democracy and the grim reality on the ground, has found itself with few good options. In the end, Syria stands as a stark reminder of the human cost of war and the limits of American power. Cuba, a land of classic cars, world-class cigars, and a revolutionary spirit that just refuses to die. For over 6 decades, Cuba has been a thorn in the side of the United States. A defiant socialist outpost just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, the relationship between these two countries is about as tangled as a plate of Cuban spaghetti. The Bay of Pigs invasion, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the decades-long trade embargo, it's a history fraught with tension, mistrust, and the occasional whiff of Cold War paranoia. Despite the Obama administration's efforts to thaw relations, the Trump administration slammed the brakes on rapprochement, tightening sanctions and accusing Cuba of human rights abuses. The Cuban government, for its part, has remained defiant, accusing the US of hypocrisy and continuing to embrace its socialist model. But here's the thing. Despite the embargo, despite the propaganda, despite the best efforts of both governments to keep them apart, the Cuban and American people have found ways to connect. Perhaps one day the political differences will fade, and these two countries will finally be able to embrace a future of cooperation and mutual respect. Pakistan, a nation of breathtaking landscapes and a strategic location, has been both an ally and a headache for the United States. It's a relationship described as a roller coaster and a geopolitical migraine. The US has relied on Pakistan in the fight against terrorism, providing billions in aid, but the partnership is fraught with suspicion and occasional betrayal. Pakistan's support for the Taliban has been a major source of tension. Pakistan argues it's acting in its own national interest. The relationship nosedived during the Trump administration. The Biden administration seeks to repair ties, but trust remains low. Meanwhile, Pakistan deepens ties with China, investing billions in infrastructure. As China's influence grows, the US risks being sidelined. The future of the US-Pakistan relationship remains uncertain. So, there you have it. 10 countries, 10 different stories, but all united by a common thread, a growing sense of frustration, even anger with the United States. Whether it's over military interventions, economic sanctions, or simply a perceived lack of respect, the US is facing a growing chorus of dissent on the world stage. The world is changing and the old rules no longer apply. The US can either adapt to this new reality or risk finding itself increasingly isolated and irrelevant. The choice, as they say, is ours.